On Monday, I was able to say the morning mass and then actually got in the car and drove to Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I could be there on Tuesday morning for the final vows of some religious sisters, one of which served in our diocese a few years ago, and so I knew her. I also was in seminary with her older brother, and so I knew the family a little bit, and I got to be with this, very beautiful final vows mass and whatnot. And the community actually was spotlighted, I don't know what the right word is for this, on Oprah several years ago, a couple of times. And Oprah actually went and spent a whole week with this religious community. So this community, they are fully habited in the traditional habits. They, take vows of poverty and obedience. They fully embrace all the church's teachings and do their best to teach all the church's teachings. And Oprah, who I don't know very well, I don't watch her shows, but I don't think that she would totally agree with these women on a lot of those things, let alone the church on a lot of those things. But Oprah nonetheless stayed a whole week with them. And at the end of a whole week of seeing these women pray at certain times throughout the day, be obedient to their superiors as best they possibly could, live in total poverty. She described this community as the most free women she's ever met. Right, when they gave in to what their superiors were asking of them, when they gave in to what God was calling them to in prayer, when they gave in to not owning things, they became free. So I get to be with them for, again, a night, and there was a whole bunch of people there, so it sounded like I was with them the whole time, but very beautiful vows on Tuesday. I drove back Tuesday afternoon. We had a totally full church for the evening mass. It was really awesome. The evening masses on Tuesdays and Thursdays are, in my opinion, really taking off, and people are utilizing them. On Wednesday, I had a few meetings in the morning. I had a couple of masses, and then part of my other responsibilities that I talked about a few weeks ago is that I still am required to help out downtown Peoria with different things. And so I went and spent time with a couple of families who were on their way actually back to Ann Arbor, Michigan from Nebraska for something that the sisters were doing this weekend. And so I got to be with, it was just two families. They had 17 kids total. It was awesome. We had mass together. It was very beautiful. The kids were all, praying their little hearts out. And then I took them on a tour of the cathedral. And no matter what I said, whether it was a truth or a lie, every time the kids were like, "Ah, that's amazing." They thought it was the coolest thing in the whole world. The cathedral, I know the cathedral in their diocese, and it's an ugly cathedral. So they were happy to be in a beautiful cathedral. And then right after that, I went to the hospice home to visit with a parishioner. And then right after that, I went and visited with a priest, actually, who was also in the hospice home. The priest was in the very final stages of life. We had a it's not even fair to call it a conversation. I did most of the talking and praying, and he could barely muster up thank you. And he was hard of breathing and whatnot, and it was very, very beautiful just to be with a brother priest who had served many years in our diocese. I'm not going to say his name because he actually has family in our parish, from what I understand. So I don't know if the family is ready for that to be public yet or not. He passed away on Friday night, very late in the night, and so I don't know yet exactly when the funeral is. But at some point this week, I'll be going to a priest funeral, probably here in the area. But it was just a very blessed couple of experiences to kind of see the very beginnings of life with this family, the middle stages of life, making promises to Almighty God, and the end stages of life. And I was moved by the simplicity of it all, by the poverty of it all. Father, who the last thing that he got to do was take one final breath. Sister, who, as she stood up to right before she stood up to go make her final vows and make solemn promises to Almighty God for the rest of her life, took a deep breath. Every time I shared something with those kids, they took a deep breath, breathing it all in. Right, there's a certain level of simplicity to it. In the gospel and in the readings, we hear of the ills of having too many possessions, having too much. In other words, letting our possessions possess us. When I was newly ordained and arrived at my first assignment, these sisters were also at that assignment, and I was a little bit embarrassed. I was kind of proud of myself of how little I had to bring to my first assignment. I had one carload. These sisters showed up, 6 of them in one van, and they each had one bag. And I knew that I had too much. And one of them, kind of putting a final dagger into my side, asked me, "Father, how many shoes do you have?" I was like, 6. She said, "How many pairs of feet do you have?" I said, "Just one." She said, "Are you stealing from the poor right now?" When I was in seminary, I was introduced to this Franciscan community out in New York called the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and they live true radical poverty. They only live in the poorest of areas. They only have 2 habits. One is their work habit, and one is their day-to-day habit. I'll be honest with you, they both smell like their work habits. Once an area that they're in, gentrification happens quite a bit in New York. Once that area gets too nice, they actually move out of the area. So the place that I stayed at, the next street over, had the highest murder rate in all of New York. And gentrification has happened, so they've had to move from that area. When I was there, this was 10 years ago, we were walking, early in the morning to the bus stop, to the train to go wherever. And I was with a couple of seminarians. One was from Sri Lanka, and this is his first time ever seeing snow, let alone a big city. And as we were walking down the street, this guy walked up to us, and he kind of looked around. He's like, "You guys want to buy some steaks?" And we, of course, were like, "What?" He said, "You want to buy some steaks?" And he opened up his jacket, and he had steaks hanging in his jacket. Now, you're thinking wrapped up steaks in the store. It was just raw meat hanging against his body. We bought 2 just to make sure. Right, but they live in the most poor of areas, and actually, the thing that I was most moved by them is at the beginning of every liturgical season, they do a poverty check. And if they haven't touched something for an entire month, they give it to the poor. Now, remind yourself, end of November, beginning of December, it could possibly be nice outside of that point, moving into the winter. If they haven't touched a winter coat in over a month at that point, they give it to the poor. And they have to beg to be warm again. Right? They check to make sure, are my possessions possessing me? And they have a house meeting to see, has anyone become attached to one thing in the house? And if they have become attached, they give that to the poor. Do my possessions possess me? We hear in the gospel, this brother comes up and he's complaining that his other brother isn't sharing the inheritance. I know from just talking with people and people coming into my office, inheritances can be evil. They can cause division in families. They can cause anger. They can make it so siblings stop talking to each other. Right? Because possessions have become to possess them. Right? The source of greed. Now, St. Paul talks in the first reading that greed is idolatry. Ultimately, right? Greed is looking at myself. And so I seek out things to make I feel better, worth more. Have my possessions come to possess me? Now, in the book of Ecclesiastes that we read today, we hear this, I would say probably his most famous of lines, vanity of vanities, all things are vanity. Qoheleth is described as this wise man. I think another way to describe it is he's a jaded old man who's grumpy. Right? So most of his writings are just things that he's experienced in life. Vanity of vanities, all things are vanity. And we translate this word as vanity, and we think of like stuff that we might own, but actually the original word they used was havel, and that means more like breath, like the air we breathe. Bubbles, sometimes they'll translate it as. Breath of merest breaths. All things are but a breath. I want you to think of the first breath you took when you came out of your mother's womb. I want you to think of the breath you took as you prepared for marriage, as you walked in the door. I want you to think of the last breath that you'll have before you enter into eternity. What is the only thing that I get to take with me when I die? I don't get to take my house. I don't get to take my kids with me. I don't get to take any of my stuff with me. What's the only thing that goes with me when I die? Sin. That is the only thing that I get to take with me. And it's ultimately how my life is judged. The sins I'm attached to. What sins I've allowed to take possession of my life. Why is it good to have a poverty of spirits? Because when I can live without the stuff, I can probably also live without the sin of it. I'm training myself, my will, to say no to those things. What is ultimately the sin of this man who's storing up this grain in barns? Jesus knows as he's describing this to them that the grain is used for the Passover. He's making it so they can't celebrate the Passover. He's stealing from those who want to worship. We read it in the 21st century as the stuff that's necessary for the Eucharistic sacrifice. Jesus who bears it all, right, so that we can receive his flesh and blood. Right, the images that we hang up all over our houses and churches of Jesus hanging on the cross, bearing everything, holding nothing back. Nothing possesses him. In fact, we have largely Protestant crucifixes that he's covered. Jesus was more than likely totally nude. He had literally nothing on him when he gave his life and love for you and I. I want to encourage you, as I'm going to do this week myself, to do a poverty check. Is there stuff in my life that's adding clutter? Right? Has things taken over my life? Is the love of God really number one? I want you to look also at your checkbook or maybe your online account. Does my online account look any different from a pagan? If I were to die and someone to look at my account and see all the things I'm purchasing, what would they think? This person is madly in love with God. Would they think that? Is there stuff in my life? The last thing I want you to think of is your will, your last will and testament. You take your last breath, and then your will comes into play. Is it going to cause division? Is it going to cause hatred? Are your kids going to stop talking to each other? What am I setting up for the rest of their life? Have I trained my kids to let possessions possess their life? I ask you to do this only because I myself am going to do this. I'm going to look through my house, see all the stuff I don't actually need, and ask myself, am I stealing from the poor by keeping this? Is someone else going to be without because I keep? Am I falling in love with God by keeping this? It's good to have poverty of spirit. It releases us from the attachments of this world because we don't get to take any of it with us. Are we rich in what matters to God?